Hey there, welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here. Welcome to the Starseed Ministry. It is Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022. Thank you for being here. Wow. Usually we broadcast on Monday, but I was out of town. Boy, I was in Gettysburg this weekend, and for those of you who are into the astro-nerdology of things, especially history and kind of retrospective astrology, then you know that this was about the time of our history where Neptune had just come into Aries, actually, at the point of the Gettysburg battle, but it's this mid to late 19th century when Neptune was in Pisces, so there are some interesting overlaps that I'm going to share with you today. How is everyone doing? How was the weekend just in general? Did you find yourself maybe perhaps, observing or involved in some shots fired? Ooh, there was some tempers flaring this weekend, Friday. Boy, talk about a crisis in how we're oriented internally as Mars and the Moon came into the sign of Gemini. Boy, shots were definitely fired. They weren't even across the bow as warning shots. They were straight and direct. Sometimes they were reckless, and definitely very difficult to hold oneself in a state of either objective witnesshood, just holding space for other people, and if you were involved in it, to take yourself back out of it and to not be necessarily getting down on yourself, but also to just be very clear with yourself, to take a step back and be like, oh, I see that progression of activity or that progression of conversation and how it started to spiral into a place where you felt or other people felt like shots fired, right? And sometimes things need to be said, but they were things that didn't necessarily need to be said. And when we look at the chart for today, we're going to kind of just do a little bit of review over some of these really large transits over the weekend and maybe take a moment to consider how things unfolded and what we're learning from them. So today's ministry I titled A Soul Open to Great Dreams, because this is a very difficult time now that Mars is coming into Gemini, and without establishing a sense of balance and certainly a sense of hope and continuing to stay open in ourselves to the arrival of that which we desire, that which we want to cultivate, we are still in an eclipse cycle that did start at 10 to 11 degrees Taurus, not that, a while ago. We're kind of getting close now to the end of this cycle, and it was all about cultivation and the patience, right? And so now that the sun is in Virgo, the patience element is going to be something that we can really strongly identify with if we choose to do so, with this expectation in some ways, and certainly an anticipation, an excitement, and an identification with what is coming to harvest, basically, and to be excited about it and to find a sense of gratitude for it. But patience is not an easy thing, and the Mercury opposite Neptune over the weekend, we talked about it on Friday, it really did test that, because these are incredibly powerful currents of cathartic, purifying, spiritual and unconscious energy that is moving through all of us. And it has we're going to see in the reading, it's so strong. And without that sense of balance, without a sense of what it is still that we want to invite into our experience, it's going to be very easy to be triggered. And it started this weekend, and I really hope that, much like I at least tried to do, and other people around me as well, is to exercise some level of patience with yourself, an awareness and an openness to really logical and not too overly rationalistic, but really with an investment in knowing ourselves at a much deeper level, and to be able to bear witness to it and see how easily our flare of instinct or emotion and wanting to act on it can be easily triggered without that sense of balance that a Gemini energy really needs. And Mars is going to be here for a while. Mars is going to station retrograde at the end end of Gemini, okay? So we're going to be many months with Mars in this sign of the dialectic and polarization. So we got a little bit of a taste and a test over the weekend. The T-square with the moon in Gemini was like, hey, how are you going to handle yourself in the midst of this triggering or flaring type of energy, basically, and intentional, just antagonism in some ways, and how you're going to respond to it. So I saw a lot of that over the weekend. I'm going to check in with the stream and the chat, of course, to see how people are feeling. It's a beautiful meditation on Sunday, got me back in the flow. And I think that's a really great way to move also into the rest of this broadcast, because it's now time to really not necessarily pick up the pieces, but be realistic and very committed to knowing and understanding what it is still that we want and what we can learn from this situation. So the solar weather has tapered, at least for the moment, right? It was really intense. We had our third quarter moon, so we're still kind of readjusting ourselves internally to whatever we were facing or experiencing over the weekend. Gettysburg was when the tide of the Civil War in the United States really changed. And, there is so much about this experience that I haven't even begun to really process on a personal level, and certainly in terms of just learning, right? And really getting into the specifics of how this event came to be. But one of the things is that the experience that we're all having, and the realization of both sides kind of being puppeted or funded or antagonized by the same basic source, whatever that is, it's not a new story. And when you start looking at the details of something as destructive, and especially in Gettysburg, right? This was, they consider it the most haunted place in the United States, in the Americas, right? That's a whole other thing I could get into in terms of being there and being a psychic, intuitive person. And, there's mediumship in my family as well. So there were some things that certainly came out in regards to that, but more of learning about the process. And right before that, right before the Civil War, and certainly right before Gettysburg, which was, a big push from the Confederacy at the line, right? I mean, the Mason-Dixon line is Maryland into Pennsylvania, and Gettysburg is, not that far north of that border line. And so there was a lot of the blending, truly, of people's perspectives, and it continues in Gettysburg to this day in terms of who had the high ground, and truly in a very literal geographical way. It was the Union that had the high ground because they managed to convene on a very large knob or hill and a topographical high ground in this area. And what is it about this place other than the location that really drew the energy of the Confederacy to want to take it, and how they just couldn't get the high ground. And when you're pushing cannons and people up there, it just drains your resources. And it really was when the tide turned. It was right before the 4th of July, 1863. First, second, and third was the Battle of Gettysburg. It was where Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address later that year in November, when the sun was in the last degrees of Scorpio. So it was pretty clear to me that both sides were antagonized by those who wanted to control the situation. And right after a big solar flare, the Carrington event in 1859 is the biggest solar flare I think that has actually been recorded in terms of our modern, technology and telescopes and tracking it. But the Mayans knew all about this. I mean, this is why 2012 was supposed to be like the end and beginning of an era, because we actually got one of those solar flares, and conveniently enough, it was facing away from Earth. Wow, that just seemed to put a damper on the whole, like, end of the world narrative that was really hot at 2012. And yeah, I guess it could have been pretty destructive to every piece of electronic technology across the entire planet, because it was big, right? But it was facing away. I just find that interesting. So, but the Carrington event, pre-Civil War, then you have this just massive conflict that is splitting this country down the middle when it was meant to represent a place of freedom, right, and liberty, and how there was so much of a there was so much to be gained by those who wanted to squash that, and how they infiltrated and basically stoked the same things in the same type of people in order to get them to basically destroy each other in the most horrific types of ways, right? I mean, down to hand-to-hand combat in some situations. So anytime, if you watch Ken Burns' Civil War, there's a number of movies, of course, whatever you've learned in the public education system, and certainly just know that that's not the full picture, and you have to really get into it yourself. But I see so many overlaps that I didn't really, I had to be in this area, and the haunting, and most hauntings are the most impactful to your psychological and mental health, right? The fact that people were popping off like that, and of course the astrology was not helping, but the overlap of the entire family being in this environment and taking a couple of days to really let it sink in a way where we all started to have a lot more gratitude for each other, started to be more patient, started to support each other in really much deeper ways. But when we first got there, it was definitely, you could feel how the antagonism got to the point where you had people in families that were divided. Wow, that seems so familiar. So I'm really grateful to the web of life in the universe that led me there at this time. I mean, I didn't plan that trip. This is all family vacation that I'm just along for the ride, and then realizing, wow, we're all just in this web and riding it out together, and it's pretty remarkable. So I'm going to share a little bit of space weather with you before we get into the reading for today. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the chat here. And I love the fact that the meditation on Sunday and that was when I felt it too. Sunday was when it started to really kind of settle down. And certainly the space weather, the solar disruptions and the magnetic disruptions were starting to settle, as we're going to see. Light on Change says, I have to jump on a call, but wanted to say hi and wish you all a great day. Thank you. And the background, thank you as well. Get your toroidal field going. Definitely felt that tension, family bickering early Sunday, but we moved through it. Yeah, exactly. It's part of the process, and it's what you do with it, how you're balanced within it. And Virgo is all about that balancing act, because it's about the blending and the realization and necessity of those boundaries, and being able to analyze those boundaries, but also at the same time not lose a sense of your feeling and your intuition and your compassion. It's a pretty important thing to stay connected to when things are popping off really strongly, and you could easily get pulled into an agenda that is really not at the core of who you are as a human and a spiritual being, much like the Civil War, right? I mean, there are so many nuanced facets to it, and to think that it was only about one specific thing that kind of gets pushed into our awareness is really not the full picture of what this conflict really represented. But it just goes to show as well that when you can trigger people through their emotional responses to something that we should be having, I think, emotional responses to. I mean, especially in terms of what the point of this country represented, it's not that those things weren't a real part of it. And in fact, it boomeranged in some ways that the, because the globalist control mechanism definitely got themselves in there and stoked that fire of fake ass rebellion, basically, over this issue because they knew it would polarize people. But then it just backfired on them. It totally boomeranged, and the North was able to enlist all of these people that otherwise were going to be held in servitude continually by the Confederates' platform. So, also something to consider as well in terms of like how we balance ourselves, what it means to be in balance as well, and to also be in connection to our integrity and our sense of humanity for each other. And it really will guide us. So the heart has a wisdom, and that's where our toroidal field really, really comes from. So, the space weather is, I'm just going to share it real quickly just so that we can get a sense of what's been going on, right? You can tell that it's been, let's see here. You can tell that it's starting to mellow out. It doesn't mean it's going to stay this way. I think that's something to consider. That's something definitely worth considering, is that it's not going to stay this way in terms of the space weather. But it seems pretty clear that we have the opportunity to intervene in those experiences at a consciousness level. That seems pretty clear to me. And the reason I say that is because man, I am I am struggling with trying to, let's do this. There we go. We're going to turn off the green screen. We're going to turn this back on. There we go. All right. I wish there was a better, honestly, how do I make that skill of being able to multitask in this way, because it doesn't matter what my state of mind is either. I just can't seem to do it. I wish I had a video director or somebody that was running the tech of all of my transitions. That would be great. And I can't even find where my video camera is. So where are you? Oh man. Because I've lost my video device for some reason. So maybe I'll just go without it right now, because it seems like that it's not really doing anything but distracting me. So my friends, I'm going to bring up here we go. Yes, there we go. So you can see that the Schumann, so we got, yesterday was Monday, the 22nd, here's the 23rd today, and even on Sunday. So, there's definitely some activity and some amplification, but it's not really as loud as it has been. Of course, what has been pretty active is the KP index. Other than the last, couple days or so, it's starting to settle down, which means that there is not as much geomagnetic unrest. Now, if you looked at the 19th, 20th, up to the 21st, it was way up in the red, up in here, and there is an impact in some way on people's mental health, their psychiatric health. And of course, we had a third quarter moon, which is always a challenge to us emotionally, based on what we have been learning, how we've been growing, and what our relationship to the previous new moon had been. So things are starting to settle, and so there's all these different factors that were coming together at the beginning of the weekend that really amplified a lot of this really tense, very, how do I say this? Combust energy. Remember, Venus is in Leo, right? So she is really also finding through our embodiment, through our relationships, through anything of value to us, whatever that is, and how that makes us feel on the inside in terms of comfort, security, beauty, harmony, all of those things in the physical fields, the sense fields as well. How does that allow us to express ourselves? How are we expressing ourselves in that way? So there's just a lot of combust, flaring type of energy. And of course, the moon was in Gemini as well over the weekend. So there's also this back and forth, right, within ourselves. But there's the rhythm, right? There was a rhythm there that we could tap into as a process, rather than getting caught in the feedback loop and feeling kind of out of control, or just so staunchly in a position that you can't even like acknowledge that there is its opposition. No matter what you think about, there will be its opposing energy that has to be seen, right? And acknowledged. The shadow must be acknowledged. The darkness and the light are meant to be in balance, not out of balance. And so even the light if it's disproportionate, is out of balance to the creative potential in at least our experience. So things calmed down, though, which was nice. I think it gave us a chance to really integrate a lot of what's been happening. So there is a coronal hole here that's kind of coming into view. It's going to give us more solar wind. You know, any of these sunspots or any of these active areas, they could turn into anything really quickly. Like this 3085, I looked at a little like short video on spaceweather.com. It in the course of like 10 hours went from nothing to this really big complex that could easily flare and send off more CMEs. So the sun is reaching the climax of its solar maximum now. It is reaching that point, as we've talked about. So just be aware there's more of this to come, and every time it does, we have an opportunity to have a relationship with it, to feel it, to understand how it impacts us and how we're going to respond as energetically based beings that have a relationship with the sun, with the planet, with each other, with life, with the magnetic field, all of these things. And this is a lot when you're like, I'm just trying to figure out who I am and what my place is in all of this. And I don't think that that's wrong. And in fact, I feel like the reading is going to give a lot of insight into how to address some of this energy right now. So the space weather, that's what that has to offer right this moment. So it's definitely something that you want to pay attention to just on a regular basis, just like the weather, right? The space weather is something I listen to updates every day, and just you learn what it means by taking the time to track it and understand the basics. So here is our reading for today. And you see we have a tower. Here's our Mars, right? I mean, here's the flames coming out of the mouth. Again, this seemed like kind of the beginning of the weekend into the weekend. In some ways, Mars coming into Gemini and giving us a sense that you can really feel this, like, breath of fire coming out through Mars and Gemini. It is truly the breath when we're talking about Gemini, because it's mutable air. So Let's look at this. We're going to just start right away with this tower moment here, my friends. So this is a Mars card. It is number 16 in the tarot. And it looks exactly what it is. It looks exactly like what it is meant to represent, right? The tower falls over. It is too narrow. It is made in hubris, right? This word is just sticking since yesterday for some reason, is just sticking so strongly. And right, because the tower was built so that, it could have a connection to the heavenly realms, right? But it was narrow and it needed to fall over, right? I mean, there's no material connection. Boy, this is a great segue again into the Catalyst Classroom and the Chiron stuff this month, right? Because the bridge can't be entirely material to this spiritual awareness, right? And so the folly of the tower here, what it represents is these sudden breakouts in realization, because you come to realize that it's not through only materialism that one reaches a state of spiritual awareness and consciousness. And so sometimes you need a swift kick in the ass. That's just all there is to it. And this is what the tower often provides. So it is in a position as a causal factor. So that's something to consider as well, that as Mars is going through Gemini, this breath of fire, right, this tower moment is something that's going to probably feel like it's being played out for a really long time, and it's probably going to be exhausting if you feed into it or you find yourself completely destroyed as a result of this material destruction. None of this is new to us here. But if it is, or you're finding yourself like, oh, this is maybe a new perspective on this kind of this narrative. It is what it is, but you see in this imagery here that you have a dove of hope. This is something that's come out quite a bit in recent astrological transits in terms of Sabian symbols, especially Saturn in Aquarius right now. It's one of those, it's like tough love, just like this. And we're going to see in the astrology today as the moon is in Cancer now, just passing over the star Sirius last night. How were your dreams? Especially if you're a Sirian starseed. I was having some pretty direct contact and visitation and just, an open connection to that part of myself. So that was pretty powerful. But and to kind of take that with us, right? This connection to an infinite source within us, then allowing that space to remain open for those great dreams to arrive, right? Because if we close ourselves off because of this, then we don't stay open to the new growth that is coming. So this is showing all of those elements of the Tower moment, and it may be in your life already. It may be something that we're all collectively going to experience together. Certainly can represent this breakout of realization in terms of belief systems, or what you thought was real or not real, or what was important to you. This is a loss in a lot of ways. But what's interesting to me is at the heart of the moment is this really kind of, I don't know how I feel about this, right? The Ace of Cups is really meant to be a new beginning. Emotional new beginning. So an openness to receive love, friendship. There's a sense of devotion here with the Ace of Cups. It's the source of love, right? This is the growth of the beginning of feelings growing. And you can see even here that there is a stream coming in and coming out of this cup. And radiating outward in this wave pattern, especially in the upper realms. It almost looks like either like a shell or a web, but underneath it's just fluid. There's not the this kind of what is it? It's stratified, right? It's got this sense that there are actual physicality to it, whereas underneath it's much more of the feels, the actual feels itself. Either way, you have this cup that is so full that it is always full and radiating out. So in this position that it came out in, where it is horizontal, it's not quite in its shadow, right, which can be really diffused or irrational. You can find yourself lonely, like the complete opposite of growing feelings, but waning feelings. Maybe there's a bit of hysteria, right? That can be part of it as well. So when this emotional capacity is in this position, it's kind of like, you see the beauty and the ugly. You feel the beauty and the ugly at the same time right here. And you can't really invest that energy in one side or the other when you're simultaneously experiencing it. And as weird as that is, it does feel like that this balance is very much here, but is also, because you see it both, it could leave you to... Well, it can lead you to cutting yourself off with the Hermit reverse. This is a real possibility. So let's keep going. So now we have a bird's nest. Whoa, there's tons of Cancerian energy with our Cancer moon right now. At the root of things energetically, as this position often represents, and in the Three of Forces in its reversal, the bird's nest, the empty nest is what this really represents when it's turned upside down. There's a separation, there's a reduction, there's a reorganization? No way. After a third quarter moon, now that it's in Cancer, who would have thought? Let go of the old, rein in your plans, right? Realize that maybe even though it seems like a loss, that the nest has been emptied, it's the opportunity to let go, to take a new direction, maybe even physically change your location, your job, your career, your anything really, your relationships, and there's a certain amount of being kind of courageous in your choices, because the bird coming out of the nest in some ways is just as much a moment of stepping off the precipice, as it is for the parent bird in many ways, right? Because they don't always fly right away. They fall out of the nest and they just lay there sometimes, and they're like, well, what am I, and they just kind of flail around, and you're not supposed to touch them, right? And eventually the parents, they are, those birds, especially cardinals, right? They stay together in male and female, like family, and so they surround each other. And even if that bird is like, oh man, just kind of hasn't figured out how to fly yet, the parents are definitely around protecting that situation. And so you may find yourself kind of like, oh, I just fell out of here, right? Especially a tower moment. That could really do that. You may find yourself also being on the other side of it, having to take a step back and realize that those that you have cared for, those things that you have nurtured and allowed to grow, need to actually now expand past their own nest and their own containment system. And you may find yourself having to step back a little bit, right? That could be it as well. What it does suggest, though, is to see this as an opportunity rather than a loss or destruction when it's in this reversal position. And as we move up the axis of our power, right, from the root and the subconscious level through into the heart, we find where our attention is really focused, and our conscious awareness is, and these higher chakras are really focused on and connected to, really concrete knowledge, true spiritual knowledge. Hilarion is an ascended master of research and science. And you can see that he, in this image, is surrounded, or at least in the background, are all these different silhouettes. Even you can see this little, the little toddler on the floor here. And that's a distribution of different kinds of people in different ages. And surrounding Hilarion in the lab, you can see that he's got a little beaker and what is, oh gosh, the abacus, right? The type of counting mechanism. And Hilarion is studying. And so this is an ascended master that allows access to not just the standard, but really the capacity to do the real research, to really get to true spiritual knowledge. And it is a logical process, but it doesn't preclude the intuition of those who have come before as holding a space. And boy, this is a Virgo energy all day long, right? That we are part of a system and part of a lineage or an ancestry or a life cycle that is more than just ourselves. And maybe it's just the specter of it, the template that had already passed, but it's still very much imprinted and here. And so there is this kind of focus here. And I think that the downside to this, if there could be one, is that you get a little bit too kind of pulled into the information aspect. And again, with Mars and Gemini now, that can be, you can find yourself like really putting a lot of your output towards this type of energy when, and letting other things go. But I do get the sense here, ultimately, that, there's really a sense of power here, and concrete knowledge that we can access if we are kind of taking ourselves emotionally out of the equation when it comes to the information, and keeping our sense of self and integrity and character and our spirit open to receive these great dreams, without getting, like I said, pulled into more of this breath of fire tower moment in and of itself. And there is a sense of, I want to see both sides of this story here. And when it's about yourself, your own decisions, your past lives, your karma, your relationships, right? Your relationship to yourself, your relationship to people around you, all of these things. If you're, I think, willing to really look at it with that concrete, almost rationalist, and truly invested in getting to the truth of yourself, which is really the Akashic Records gives you everything you need in order to make those kind of, or come to those conclusions. It's there. And I think there's a certain thoughtfulness here that, comes with this card with the Hilarion. Now, I'm again, we're going to talk about Virgo, right? And the Hermit is also another Virgo card directly, because you're talking about the energy of analysis and intuition, realizing that it's not enough just to crunch the numbers, and it's not enough to just be in the light of knowledge in and of itself, right? The Hermit goes into the darkness of their own material existence in order to bring the light back out in a service way. I mean, this is also the Jesus to the Christ, and as a way to understand it, right? You can see this dichotomy in a number of cultures and certainly modalities, right? We're seeing it right here in the tarot in terms of the Hermit. This is the Virgo card. And you see the three-headed dog of Cerberus, right? This is who is guarding the underworld. The Hermit has the light that holding, that is lighting the pathway for others, right? And you see the cosmic egg, that is surrounded by the serpent, and the idea of the regenerative force being the power of our vitality, and also the means in which we create new, right? And creative transmutation, new creation. But it requires going into the underworld of who we are, of the material existence. And you have to kind of you have to take yourself away, right? You can't necessarily have access to this information if your attention is still on the surface, right? The roots of the plant during Virgo are doing the work under the surface. They are pulling the minerals from the soil that are supporting the fruit, not the sunlight necessarily. And I'm not saying at all. What I'm saying is the cycle of the plant, for instance, is changing. And photosynthesis is not the primary function right now. It is the roots pulling the minerals from the soil to support the fruit that is growing with the seed. And so the Hermit, it represents the necessity to go under the surface, which means, pulling back in some ways and getting into the process of putting things where they belong within yourself, right? And pulling resources from around you in order to do this work. And so it is service oriented, because you're doing it not for yourself. You're doing it to protect and mature the fruit that holds the seed, so the life cycle can continue, right? And so there's where this kind of service oriented energy with the Hermit comes from, because there's a whole point to it. Now, the Draco starseeds know all about this, because this is where this is where the moment of decision truly has come from. Do you take that energy of learning the secrets of life and use it to manipulate and exploit and not be of service, or do you step into that selfless kind of altruistic role and work as a healer? This is also why the shaman has to take this pathway as well and go into their own shadow and into their own darkness in order to be able to know how to guide others through the process as well. And so this is about carrying the light again. So the reason I find this a little interesting in its reversal is that, some people are going to be forced in. Some people are going to run away and go within as a form of escapism in its reversal. And some people, there's going to be a lot of bitterness about this. And I'm not suggesting we're all going to feel this, but Saturn in Aquarius is very much connected to this card, which is exactly where Saturn is in its retrograde. And there's a very specific transit with the moon that's a quincunx, and for those of you who understand astrology, you know what that is, but that is an angle that kind of provides a wild card moment that forces us to adjust ourselves. It's like a square peg in a round hole, but in that process we transmute, right? We create something new instead of trying to shove it in there, or just not, or walk away from it and not even deal with it. This is that moment of almost divine intervention in some way. So there's something very particular about the moon in connection to Saturn today that's going to shed a little bit of light, I think, and give us a sense of, okay, this is how we can adjust ourselves in this moment so that we don't get into a place of also complacency, like I said, just bitterness, kind of pulling in and retracting when it's not appropriate, instead of doing it as a means to heighten our own awareness and our own intuition and really hear our own inner voice, right? Now, this could mean so many things to different people depending on what's going on for you, but for a general feel here, I do see that some are going to retire from life in a way that is not with full conscious awareness. But there's something about Hilarion up here that can really, as like a strategy. And Pallas Athena actually is in conjunction with, is in Gemini right now. And she is the goddess of wisdom and strategy in war, actually. And so there's something to be said about a strategy that employs this kind of logical approach, really feeling the difference here, or feeling the balance emotionally between the beautiful and ugly, and not, it may have us like really pull in, but that may not be a terrible thing as we kind of figure out like, well, what do I do with this energy? So what do you do? And what do we do? Well, there is some really, I think, powerful guidance. So first of all, 3 of Keys and 3 of Forces together. We've seen this many times. In its reversal, right? It's time to walk away from the chess game. This is a message that keeps coming up over and over. Like, it is going to become untenable. It is untenable to continue to be the pawn on someone else's chessboard, to continue to give your resources to the chess game if you are not the one playing it, or you are not consciously committing to, I'm just going to watch this game as it plays out, right? It's kind of draining the energy here. And maybe, again, it feels like a loss because something got upended in some ways when this chess game is reversed, right? The conflict is untenable. It's time to disengage, and to make plans to put this ship behind you and create a space for a more peaceful life. So again, this is that 3 of Forces in the bird's nest. You may feel like you just got spilled out of it, but at the root of it, it's just like, hey, this is a time to create a space for something beautiful, peaceful, harmonious, that's really in line with your joy to come into your life, and actually believe that it's possible. I can't tell you how, just like when you finally, or for those of you who've had those moments where you actually feel that, it's one of the primary factors for things turning around, right? Now, you got to find balance in your body, and walking is one of the best ways to do that, right? Whatever type of movement art is going to balance both hemispheres in your brain by your 2 sides of your body having to work in cooperation with each other, just walking, and walking intentionally, realizing like, oh, these 2 things have to work together. Wow, my entire musculoskeletal system, my nervous system, my cardiovascular system, all part of this process of one foot the other, right? And this balanced perspective. So if you need something to get your brain to start balancing, then start doing things that require your brain works together. You know what else is amazing? Music. It is absolutely another practice. Any type of music, singing, playing an instrument, listening to certain types of instrumental music will give your brain, especially playing and performing in some way or practicing, right? Because it is processed in both sides of the brain. Music is, right? The logical, analytical, learning, the technical aspect, all in the left brain, and the experience of it in the right brain. You have to bring them together. So that's another example. But it seems like bringing some sort of practice, some actual embodied practice. And you know what? Venus and Leo. tap into your joy, whatever it is, right? And you have to, have to give yourself space to really figure out what that is. Many people don't even know. And they do know. We do know, but we've just never allowed ourselves to really find the space or to give it full range of expression because of so many things that we do to hold ourselves back. And Chiron is going to be a big part of this conversation all month, of course, because that is the bridge right there. And many times the thing that is so hurtful and really has made a lasting impact on who we are is oftentimes a thing that turns into a superpower to be of service to other people. And how do you bridge that instead of staying trapped in it is the real lesson of Chiron. So anyway, the Kiwi, whatever, walking, that's what I do. I mean, that's primary what I do. And walking in nature, right? And if you can't do that, that's okay. But that would be a really good way. And if you can be barefoot, oh my gosh, you are doing so much of a favor to your body. Now, the platypus has come up a couple of times, which has been signaling to me that people really need to start really learning this practice. Stop complaining. If you realize how much you truly are complaining or you're in a state of lack in terms of your inner dialogue, and this is not a shameful thing. This is just again, Hilarion. Think about it from a logical thing. You're like, wow, I see now this process of mental activity that leads me to this place. How much have I complained about this one thing that I hate all the time, and not taking any action to even see what you are grateful for? That in itself will start opening the whole new neural pathways. Just focusing on the gratitude and your blessings, right? It's a really easy practice and it takes nothing to do, but the impact on your mental health, your emotional capacity, and those neural pathways is so much more than the effort you actually need to put in. It's kind of amazing. So, but you have to kind of get over that hump of of feeding it and really just realizing that it's happening. We all do it. Boy, we've been trained to do it, right? Programmed, if you will, for a really long time to stay in that place. And if we're spiritual beings in a material body and we can manifest anything, and if fifth density is about that, we have to always be focused on our joy and our, integrity as well, and to give ourselves space to be authentic to who we are. So, but complaining is just going to keep bringing it back around. And that's something that I think it's time to just let it go. You have to, right? If you're miserable in a situation, but you're just like, I can't do anything about it. It's like, well, you can change your mindset about it and you can make decisions, even micro decisions, to do something about it. And it will start to unfold in a different direction, or it'll start to align with your heart's desire, truly. So Archangel Michael, boy, this is a tenuous conversation in a lot of ways. So those of you that have been involved, at least in the Catalyst Classroom and the Starseed Fellowship, Archangel Michael is related to one of the royal fixed stars, which is Aldebaran. And it's a mixed bag there. And Aldebaran, in terms of the energy that it holds, the beings that are involved with it, it's, again, there's this Gemini energy of, you got all of the, all of the thoughts and the mental realm is truly like a weapon. And you can't just necessarily tackle every issue by chopping it down or shooting it with an arrow, right? Now, the courage that this card represents, the divine channel of power, the flaming heart, this is important. When Michael is reversed, especially in this deck, right, there is a need to reconnect to your real power, and it really will indicate that there's a feeling of growing weakness, and it really has to do with the old perceptions and limitations. Like, they can't really fill you, and so you start feeling weaker because they start, they're not actually fulfilling at a spiritual level. And so there's a necessity to replace these things and take action on your own behalf. And again, You may have to take a step back and not be so emotionally entrenched in the ugly, for instance, or the beauty, so that you can have a realistic perspective of what is going on. And I'm not saying that if you're not tapped into just the flow of beauty and really moved by it, that you should shut it down. But it's about balance, not imbalance, right? And this tower moment, I think, is what triggers this kind of like, wow, it's beautiful and it's terrifying at the same time. And to understand why and how it can be an opportunity, and also to reinforce where our power is coming from, which is our perspective and what we choose to focus on. That's where our free will and our choice comes from, right? And many people, I think, are still feeling disempowered. And again, you can feel a temporary sense of power when you lash out at someone, right? Or make these rash decisions or fire at someone out of frustration or temper, right? But that's not real power, right? That's just a release of energy, right? And how are you going to fill your cup back up if you are just doing that? Or you find yourself siphoning it from other people. I don't feel that in this reading based on who would be really engaging with this broadcast, and certainly energetically who would be connecting to this. But there are people that is the only thing that they have at their disposal. And that has a lot to do, again, with where the power is coming from. And if you can't find that infinite space of power within yourself that is your connection to source in this material existence, you're gonna either feel disempowered and keep focusing on the lack, or you're going to find try to force it out of others, or find that power by creating chaos and harnessing the energy from that situation. And that's, when that is your only energy, that is that chess game, right? And we know what that's all about. Again, when you're caught, they're just as much caught in their own trap as we've been caught in their trap. Boy, if that doesn't open your heart into some sort of true universal compassion, I don't know what will, right? And it doesn't mean you can't have feelings about the things that people have done that have been a betrayal of humanity at the base level, and whether it's out there in the leadership or in your very own life or even within yourself, right? It's okay to recognize these things and to have emotional responses, but it's a feedback loop that can only feed itself for so long as we come out of this exclusive third density experience. It's just not there. And so we have to, if we don't let it go, it's going to feel like we're losing something. So boy, oh boy, it is intense times right now, my friends. So I want to bring up the chart and get an idea of what to, and just kind of go over the astrology real quick here. I also want to share, let's get this part out of the way before we move on. I'm going to check in with the chat here in a second. So the first thing I want to bring up, I'm still offering the Starseed Synastry readings, $88 when they're normally $111. This is the astrology of relationships. That's what Synastry is. And this is looking primarily at the overlaps in your Starseed connections. This has been incredibly powerful. It can be very enlightening to understand your partner, other loved ones in your life who you share some sort of soul connection, but could use some clarity. This is a great tool. So you can book this at catalystenergies.net right from the home page when you get there. The other thing I want to share is that for those who are Virgo and Pisces folks, the lunar transit forecast sale is now open for y'all, yins, yous, wherever you're from. So if you're a Virgo or Pisces sun, moon, or rising sign, you can book this forecast at the sale rate, as you see here. Also information at catalystenergies.net. That's linked in the description box below, and the means to book this is also on the homepage. And finally, just to get an idea here of the Catalyst Classroom this month, I did send it out in the email. We did talk about it on Friday's broadcast, but just to remind those that may be interested still in signing up or haven't checked it out but are still subscribers, we've already had the introduction session to this month's theme of Chiron as the bridge or the Rainbow Road. So that's posted for subscribers. This week we're going to go into all of the astrology, so Chiron in the houses, Chiron in the signs, look at a couple demo charts and get an idea of how to read Chiron in the chart. So that's coming by the end of this week for subscribers. If you're interested in that, link in the description below to Starseed Fellowship and Catalyst Classroom. By the way, for Starseed Fellowship folks who want to be live with the Zoom this week, I put the survey up on Subscribestar, and as per usual, it's all tied between like 3 different times and dates, so get on there and vote if you're interested in participating and you want to make sure that that time frame that is available for you is getting represented in that poll, right? So here we are at our, we're going to open the chart here, and I'm also going to check in with the stream real quick, see what's going on there. All right, guys, there we go. Move this as well. I'm not sure how long this is going to last. I can feel my voice kind of losing it right now. So just got back from my daily walk. I started back to this on the mornings last week, and it feels so good. William Lund says, hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Tucker. Oh, that's interesting, right? Going incognito. You're not the first person that's usually on this chat that goes incognito. So it's good to have you here, Amanda. Thanks for being part of this chat as we go into the astrology. I think I might bring my green screen back up here. Whoops, maybe not. Although that is a pretty cool image. So yeah, I do the walks every day. There's an old Rails to Trails. Well, it's not old, but the rail line is old. But the Rails to Trails pathway is about 20 years old. And I just can walk from my house right onto it, and it just takes me in either direction. I can walk to my parents' house on it if I wanted to, or walk all the way into downtown Williamsport, or ride my bike, 30 miles on this pathway if I want. So it is such a reset to do something like that. So Megan, I'm 100% with you on that walk. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to do after I'm done with this broadcast. All right, friends. So let's look at today's astrology, kind of get an idea of what the week has in store. So we are in our last lunar cycle, right? So the fourth quarter. That's what I meant to say. We're in the last quarter of the new moon in Leo, right? So we're going to have a new moon in Virgo on the 27th. Virgos, sun, moon, and rising. I'm going to be putting out the general Virgo forecast this week for you. So if you're not subscribed yet, that's a good time. It's a good time to subscribe so that you know that I'm when I post that video, because that's my offering to those who are representatives of next month's lunar cycle, which will be Virgo and Pisces. So this is the last quarter, though, so we are kind of reorganizing ourselves. The moon is in Cancer. It's actually just crossed over its lunar apogee, so it's been the furthest away from the Earth in its orbit over last night into today, which means that it's crossed Black Moon Lilith. One second. There we go. And Mercury is still in that trine to Pluto. It was exact already, but it's still only within a degree, so it's still coming off of there. So there's this, the patience, especially in terms of words and ideas, and really being able to exercise a maturity in our words, in our expressions, and in our thought processes has been curated really through Mercury's time in Virgo. And so this trine to Pluto, which effectively is, the power released from the Tower moment, is showing that there's been, especially since yesterday and Sunday, there has been this a very grounded approach through a process, right? Something that has been already set down before us. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here, and realize that there is a form that can be followed when maybe you don't. So you can kind of strangely enough, so you can kind of take your mind out of the process. And when you do that, it allows your body, it allows your intuition, and it allows much more of a spiritualized consciousness to come into your mental realm and cognition through Mercury. Just like in, especially Japan, the form is very important, and the ceremony is really important in Japanese culture, for instance. So even in Reiki, right, there is a process through your attunements that is something that you can, that connects you to a lineage that's so deep and so ancient, and you just take yourself almost out of it and become, an agent for it. And by doing that, it allows parts of you to step forward that normally are kind of getting pushed aside by our conscious mind. And so other things that, especially the Japanese culture, but there are other ways that this kind of ceremony is so valuable in terms of establishing your connection to a pattern that is started well before you and will continue as a result of your participation in it. Now, the trine to Pluto is like, here, there is something here to give our mind a track to focus on in the experience of the total demolition, right? Pluto and Capricorn in its retrograde, like just going back over everything that's already been excavated and demolished, and just being like, oh, look at all this rot that's down here. I had no idea how bad it was down here. Boy, maybe we should pull some more of this. Oh, I had no idea we were going to have to go all the way down to the subfloor and actually deal with this. Whoa, the foundation, it is so like dissolved away by just all of this, underwater channels or whatever it is. There's something here that even with the destruction of these established institutions and structures, the fact that life goes on is something that the mind can tap into in this moment, and has been. It's been very grounding, I feel like, and it's kind of like, okay, this is more, I'm not controlling all of this, and in fact there's something that I can tap into that gives that form and that ability for something more intuitive to step forward. And this Hermit reversed really could be part of this, especially with Pluto retrograde. But again, the Saturn in Aquarius, I feel, is a really strong connection here. So the sun is officially in Virgo, yay, speaking of Virgo, and so we're in a Virgo season, right? This is the season leading to the harvest. This is the ripening. This is the maturing. This is the fruit coming into its fullness. And so identifying with that is kind of like being excited when when the new baby is coming, when you're pregnant, when you can take that and apply it to any situation in which you yourself are identified with that which is maturing, under the surface in the world around you, that you are maturing it by way of your conscious choices, your analysis, your intuition, all of the things that Mercury represents. Mercury does rule Virgo. So we've had some time here to really master this type of energy. Now, Mercury is going to station retrograde in a number of weeks, not before we get to the equinox. So there's also this Hermit reversed as well. Just know that there's going to be a going back inward, maybe when, as a result of like this very powerful, sudden, disruptive experience of kind of getting pushed back into this place. And again, Mercury will go retrograde back over this place, right? It's going to come back into a trine with Pluto in its retrograde, and is going to come back to 25 degrees Virgo Virgo, which is where it was when it was pretty much opposite Neptune, right? So what it's going to take to really maintain one sense of boundary and self as the deluge sweeps through every level karmically with Neptune in Pisces, right? This deluge, this cathartic purification of all the corruption and perversion of these systems that are really meant to give us a sense of cohesion and compassion and a sense of unity, right? But the downside to this is all the boundaries go away and you don't know the difference between you and other, which is not how sovereignty really works. So that's totalitarianism. So these themes are going to be coming back around, and so there may be a bit of a forced kind of intro version with the Mercury retrograde, okay? So we'll talk about that more as it gets closer. Venus and Leo we talked about, of course, today, and you know, the moon was in a square to Chiron, and was in a, you know, made all kinds of interesting connections last night into today that are pretty favorable, right? It's a sextile to Uranus, as you can see here. There was the square to Chiron much earlier today that really challenged our sense of integration as we are really just addressing the fact that there is something, you know, there's almost a kind of like innocence here, if that makes sense. It's as if, you know, we've really been trying so hard to, you know, create that potency within us that we have forgotten that there is a relationship to nature that we can even have with our own subjective identity and our own self. And the ego in and of itself is not bad. It's like the inner child. And if we forget about the inner child and the relationship the inner child has, that's so much more pure and almost innocent to the world, you know, to the spiritual unseen world, then you see how we've kind of gotten pulled into more of the material shame and grief that Chiron represents, as opposed to how we can bridge that into our superpower. So the square to Chiron earlier is, especially as the moon was crossing the star Sirius and coming out to the other side of it, was more of just like, okay, so how do I integrate this, right? Like, how do I integrate my character into this emotional experience that I'm having? And I think this Ace of Cups and its horizontal axis has a lot to do with like, how do I do that? You know, what does this feel like? And all we can feel in that moment is the tension to the fact that, well, this is how I've been doing it for myself this whole time. And like, how can I even conceptualize or feel within myself? How do I step out of that to be in my character, but also not let go of this connection? I mean, this was, is it possible to not get caught in the trap of the either or? And I think this really spelled it out emotionally, especially in your dream state, perhaps, especially a moon in Cancer, very close to Lilith, very close to Sirius. I mean, you're getting into the depth of feels that doesn't seem like it has any boundary at all. But the boundary is the emotional relationship of love and belonging and family. And if you feel like life is your family and your connection to source provides that type of containment, then you're good, right? Nothing can take that away from you. And Chiron is kind of that trap of like, oh, I can't get out of this identity. In fact, that is very much a possibility, but you have to release yourself from it intentionally, right? Rather than get caught up in using it as a means to bypass that healing. Oof. Chiron, and I'm glad we're talking about Chiron this month because it is a big one. Let's see what else is happening today. Oh yeah, so Venus is also going to come into this trine, not Venus, sorry. The moon is coming into a trine with Neptune as it's coming into conjunction with Procyon or Procyon. And there is an endowment and an inner strength that comes when we really have faith and trust in that which surrounds us, those relationships, the family, our marriage, right? Those really, that tight-knit lattice structure that protects us emotionally and allows us to be vulnerable. When that is created through willful action, through a sense of choice, then, boy, there's nothing that we have so much inner strength. And it also, again, it kind of invites in, right? We have this endowment of strength that we didn't even know was there as a result of a willingness to tap into the power of our connection to each other. And the story of Procyon and that clip that I posted on social media from Alex Collier, I think just encompassed it so beautifully. Is like it forced a lot of underground. Ooh, there's that hermit energy again. Forced it underground in a way that the only way to truly find a release from that was to go deeper, right, and to go into the inner power and being able to broadcast that because it was so strong that it could not be heard, right? And so this is something that, as the deluge of Neptune and Pisces comes through ourselves internally, right, in the retrograde, there's a lot of I see a lot of regret around certain actions that are starting in some cases to be brought out onto the surface, but you can really feel it in people just in general with certain things, like, and becoming, just waking up, becoming aware, and how that doesn't mean that we and our connection to life and our connection to where we feel strong and safe and our family, right? And what we do for, to maintain that, it doesn't mean that that's gone. But, the cycle in many ways is completing in these larger structures, as we've been talking about. And it reinforces just how powerful that inner power truly is for us. This moon in a quincunx here, I'm going to show here. Let's go forward. This moon in a quincunx to Saturn, I think, is going to be also how we really adjust to a situation that may feel like we want to run away from, that we are not aware of all of these really small opportunities, like we're not taking for granted everything that has kind of led to this point, right? All of the trial and error, all of the little things that have been gifts along the way that maybe we have just been so caught up in our complaining that we haven't noticed, and realizing, when we can realize that, I think that it's not a mutually exclusive experience to stay open to that transcendent happiness that we want, you know what I mean? That comes, and the longing for it. That seems to be a strong feeling. The longing for that in our soul that's open. And we may feel the need to just really pull back. We may feel that need. We may be forced into that because we're like, I don't know how I feel. And perhaps there's a resentment of having to kind of pull back in and do this work. But it's not without this fulfillment. And I think that if we don't lose sight of that and we can keep that space, that longing within our soul and the waters of our soul, we're going to have an opportunity to find a strength and a security in Saturn retrograde, with the hermit, even in a really kind of resistant type of way to it. And when Saturn moves back over this point in its retrograde, we're going to see exactly how all of these experiences have led to creating a buffer in some ways that allows us to enjoy it and feel kind of protected and cushioned, right, by the shock of maybe what otherwise would just be kind of like a flat on the face type of experience, okay? Which can be very, very hurtful and could really, it's like a toddler falling flat on their face, right? But if there's a pillow there, maybe it won't be so bad. And maybe the pillow, or just this tiny little mat, gosh, when I studied Ayurveda and yoga in Southwest India many years ago, 2010. And I wasn't there very long, maybe about a month. And we were doing yoga on the top of this. We were doing a service project, and on the top of like this, the patio or a terrace that was open, we would do our yoga in the morning. And we were being trained and taught by, a person who was doing this at an academic level and as a practicing yoga teacher as well. And this floor was concrete, and all we had were these bamboo mats. And I remember how, like, you start out there and you're just like, seriously, I'm gonna do yoga on a concrete floor on this bamboo mat that might as well not even be there. But I'll tell you what, by the end of that month, you realize that bamboo mat was, it was just like this tiny bit of cushioning, but it was, when you went back to the concrete, you're like, oh my gosh. But at first, all the Westerners, right? Because it's all Westerners, Europe, Western Europe, all English speaking, Canada, the US, even South Korea, right? I mean, that's a very Westernized Asian country. All English speakers, but all of us being like, really? Because you're so used to like having your cushiony mat and your yoga class, and the real thing is just like, you're going to do yoga or not. Yoga is not about what kind of mat you do it on. It is about, your body getting in alignment in order to house a spiritualized consciousness. And so this Saturn retrograde, it feels like that to me, except in Aquarius, which is much more about the technology and the resonance of civilization as a whole, being kind of that buffer. And right now it may not seem like it, but if you fall into the process of complaining about it, or just being like, this is too much, or I need something more to buffer me because I'm uncomfortable, whatever it is, like Saturn can give a fuck if you're uncomfortable, right? I mean, there's nothing about that in terms of Saturn, your comfort level. Now, Cancer, it's opposite, absolutely. But it's a quincunx. So you and me, individually, we have to make a choice. How do we transmute this energy? And it has a lot to do with not losing that longing, right? Just because it's not exactly where you want it to be right now, when you keep that space open in a way that is inviting, right? It will show up, right? And so just keep that in mind as you go through the day and into the rest of the week. Now, Uranus is going to station retrograde this week, okay? That's something to consider, right? We're coming into our balsamic moon, coming into Leo. So it very combust, but also not very reflected by the light of the sun, which is much more about like, okay, we're going to get patient, and we're going to put things where they belong and understand how duality and polarization can really work in our favor, how we can have an objective approach to this whole process, right? And certainly as we get deeper into Virgo, it's going to get more like, whoa, I didn't realize this is what it meant. But the balsamic moon moving through Leo over the rest of the week and meeting Venus, right, is just we're going to have to really rely on that intuition that we establish with that longing for that transcendence, right? To longing for that sense of inner happiness and power and belonging and where it comes from, right? And to have a little bit of gratitude, or more than a little bit of gratitude, for the things that may have not seemed like much at first, but are actually now providing the scaffolding and the backbone for you to stay in your own sense of power and who you are in the face of the entire civilization moving up in its resonance, because that's really what's happening. And it's an uncomfortable process. It's not easy, right? We're going to be, those of us who are doing this, and that's all of us really, are going to be, the frontline mentors for any other being that's going to go into this experience, right? And so it's a very important mission that we're on, my friends. So if nobody else has any questions today, comments, or anything, thank you so much for your participation. By the way, I'm going to end this stream for today. So my friends, thank you for being here. I truly appreciate each and every one of you so very much. Everything you need is in the description box below. If you're interested in readings, energy work, that's something, distance sessions, you can also book as well, and it's really supportive of your process as an energetic being, right? So that's something that you can look into as well. Starseed Fellowship, we're going to be meeting this week as soon as we nail down a time. Catalyst Classroom, we're going to be looking at Chiron in all of its astrological configurations. Let's see what else. A Virgo new moon happening on the 27th. So Virgos, keep a lookout. Make sure you're subscribed to know when I drop that new moon forecast. And surely, if you find this content helpful and inspiring, when you hit that like button, when you comment, when you share it, it influences the algorithm so other people can find. And it happens all the time. People find me just on their feed and they're just like, oh my God, thank you. You know what I mean? And some of those people are part of the fellowship now, and are leaders and out front. So it does actually make a difference. I try to remember as well, if I really value content, just hit the like button. It's really easy to do. It actually makes a difference. And of course, your comments and your participation in the chat are so great, because that's how we're going to do it, is together, my friends. Nobody out here is going to be the one telling you what to do and how to do it. We are making that decision for ourselves. So in the meantime, have a great week, everyone. If you are waiting for a reading or for me to respond to any personal messages, please be patient. I have a lot to catch up on, and I promise it is coming. So thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other the best you can. I'll see you guys on Friday for the new moon forecast. Bye.